Funerals are just starting guns for the greedy. When Nora's husband died, her in-laws didn't just offer cold condolences, they served a 30-day eviction notice. They thought they stripped her of everything. They didn't know the man they buried left a final, ruinous trap right beneath their feet. Death is not a quiet affair. It is loud, bureaucratic, and distinctly transactional. It smells like stale coffee, heavily perfumed lilies, and the cheap adhesive of cardboard boxes. Tom had been in the ground for less than 4 hours. The dirt over his casket in the municipal cemetery was still loose, still holding the shape of the backhoe's teeth. Back at the house, the reception was winding down. Nora stood in the kitchen, a half-empty glass of tap water warming in her grip, listening to the ice clink against the rim. She was 31 years old, a widow of 4 days, and completely hollowed out. A ruptured brain aneurysm doesn't give you time to say goodbye. It just turns off the lights. In the living room, her mother-in-law Evelyn wasn't crying. Evelyn was measuring. Nora watched through the doorway as Evelyn paced the length of the original hardwood floors, her sensible heels clicking a sharp, predatory rhythm. Beside her stood Greg, Tom's older brother, a man whose primary defining trait was his profound ability to fail upward. Greg was currently running a hand over the custom wainscoting Tom had spent 6 months stripping, sanding, and staining by hand. "You could knock this wall out," Greg was saying, entirely oblivious to the fact that his voice carried easily into the kitchen. "Open concept, buyers eat that up. The lot value alone in this neighborhood has tripled since Dad bought it." Nora closed her eyes. The house was an old craftsman, built in 1924, sitting on a corner lot of a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. When Tom and Nora moved in 3 years ago, it was a wreck. Sagging porch, knob and 2-bay wiring, a roof that leaked a brown slurry every time it rained. Tom had bled into this house. He rebuilt the porch joists. He rewired the walls. He spent weekends covered in drywall dust and grease, turning a dilapidated eyesore into a home. Evelyn noticed Nora watching and paused. She smoothed down the front of her black designer dress and walked into the kitchen. Her face arranged itself into a mask of solemn, practiced pity. "Nora, darling," Evelyn said, her voice dropping an octave to simulate grief. "You look absolutely exhausted. Are you eating?" "I'm fine, Evelyn." Nora's voice felt like sandpaper in her throat. Evelyn sighed, leaning against the granite counter Tom had installed for their first anniversary. "I know today is impossibly hard, but Greg and I were just talking. We want to take as much off your plate as possible. The practical things, the ugly things." Nora gripped her glass tighter. "There's nothing to do right now." "Well, unfortunately there is," Greg said, stepping into the kitchen. He pulled a thick manila envelope from the inside pocket of his suit jacket and dropped it on the island. It landed with a heavy, definitive thwack. Nora stared at the envelope. What is that?" "It's the title and the trust paperwork," Evelyn said softly, though her eyes were hard and bright. "I don't know if Tom ever explained it to you, sweetie, but this house, the deed, it was never in his name. Not completely." The kitchen seemed to tilt. Nora looked from Evelyn to Greg. "We pay the mortgage. We pay the property taxes." "You paid rent to the family trust," Greg corrected, pulling a sheet of paper from the envelope. He didn't look sad. He looked vindicated. "Dad bought this place in 2010 through the Hayes Holding Company. He let Tom live here, let him fix it up. But when Dad died, the controlling shares of the trust went to Mom. Tom was supposed to buy the deed out before you two got married, but he dragged his feet. He never finalized the transfer." "He was fighting you in arbitration," Nora said, the memory surfacing through the fog of her grief. Tom, sitting at the dining table at 2 in the morning, rubbing his temples over legal documents. "My mother is trying to bleed me on the appraisal," he had said. "She wants market rate for the renovations I paid for." "He was being unreasonable," Evelyn said smoothly. "But the fact remains, Nora. The house belongs to the trust, and frankly, a 4-bedroom craftsman is far too much upkeep for a single woman on a teacher's salary. The trust can't subsidize you living here." Nora stared at them. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it paralyzed her. Her husband's body was barely cold. His boots were still sitting by the back door, carrying the mud from last Tuesday's rain. "You're evicting me," Nora said. It wasn't a question. "We are transitioning the property," Evelyn corrected gently. "Greg has a contractor coming on Monday to assess the walls. We're going to flip it. We'll give you 30 days, Nora. Standard tenant notice. You can take the furniture you bought, of course, but the appliances, the fridge, the stove, those belong to the property." 30 days. They were wiping Tom from the earth, erasing his sweat and his life from these walls to make a quick profit, and they were giving her 30 days to pack up the wreckage of her marriage. Nora wanted to scream. She wanted to smash the water glass against the granite and watch them flinch. But the exhaustion was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, pinning her to the floor. She looked at Evelyn's manicured hands, at Greg's smug, slightly flushed face. They had the paperwork. They had the expensive lawyers. Nora had a checking account with $4,000 in it and a hole in her life that would never close. "Get out," Nora whispered. "Nora, be reasonable," Greg started. "Get out of my house," she said, louder this time, her voice cracking. Evelyn patted Greg's arm. "Let's go, Gregory. She needs time to process." Evelyn offered one last, devastatingly fake smile. 30 days, darling. Let us know if you need boxes." 28 days later, the house was a graveyard of cardboard. Nora moved through the rooms mechanically, a roll of packing tape heavy around her wrist. The silence in the house was absolute, broken only by the harsh, tearing sound of the tape sealing another box. She had spent the last 4 weeks shrinking her life down to fit into a moving truck. Greg had been a constant, lingering presence over the last week. He claimed he was there to help facilitate the transition, but Nora knew a warden when she saw one. He sat in a folding chair in the living room, drinking his expensive coffee, watching her to ensure she didn't pack anything the trust deemed a fixture. "Leave the brass handles on the bathroom vanity, Nora," Greg had called out 2 days ago when she was packing her toiletries. "Tom expensed those to the trust account." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Tom had bought those handles at a flea market in Portland, but Nora didn't have the energy to fight. She simply unscrewed them, dropped them on the counter, and walked away. Grief had stripped her of her fight. She was operating on autopilot, fueled by cheap diner food and a desperate need to just be away from the Hayes family. On her final afternoon, Nora was clearing out Tom's basement workshop. It was the only room Greg refused to enter, complaining about the smell of sawdust and engine oil. For Nora, the smell was entirely Tom. It was the scent of his neck when he hugged her from behind. It brought fresh, stinging tears to her eyes. She pulled open the heavy metal drawers of his workbench, sorting wrenches and drill bits into a rusted tool box. Tom was a meticulous man. Every tool had a place, outlined in faded black marker on a pegboard, but as she emptied the bottom drawer, her fingers brushed against something taped to the underside of the metal shelf. Nora paused. She crouched lower, peering into the dark recess. A heavy, thick envelope was secured to the metal with silver duct tape. Her heart gave a strange, uneven thump. She peeled the tape away. The envelope was dusty, heavy, and sealed with wax. Written across the front, in Tom's messy, blocky handwriting, were 3 words: "For Nora. Eventually." She sat back on her heels on the cold concrete floor. The basement suddenly felt very quiet. She slid her thumb under the flap and tore it open. Inside was a thick iron key, older than the house itself, the metal cold and pitted. Alongside it was a single sheet of yellow legal paper. "Nora, if you are reading this, my heart finally gave out. The doctors told me last year the aneurysm was a ticking clock. I didn't tell you. I'm a coward for that, and I will spend eternity apologizing to you." Nora choked on a sob, her vision blurring. She wiped her eyes furiously, leaving a smear of grease across her cheek. "I also know my mother. The second I am gone, she will come for the house. She thinks she has me cornered with the holding company's trust documents. She thinks the deed is ironclad. It's not. My father was a bastard, but he was a paranoid bastard. When he originally bought this land, he bought 2 parcels. The trust only owns the land the physical house sits on. They don't own the foundation, the basement, or the 12 feet of earth extending to the property line. I bought that from Dad before he died, under a separate LLC. I own the ground, and now you own the ground. Nora stared at the words, her breath hitching. I kept waiting for the right time to detonate this bomb on Evelyn, to force her to hand over the house structure in exchange for the land rights. But I ran out of time, so now it's yours. Underneath the loose brick behind the furnace, there is a lockbox. This key opens it. Inside is the secondary deed, properly notarized and filed with the county under a blind trust in your name, plus enough cash to hire a shark. Let Evelyn start her precious renovations. Let them sink their money into the walls. And when they try to sell it, you tear the ground out from under them. I love you. Give them hell. Nora sat frozen in the basement dirt, the iron key pressed into her palm, hard and real. Upstairs, she could hear Greg's heavy footsteps pacing the hardwood. She could hear him talking loudly on his phone to a contractor about knocking down the load-bearing wall in the kitchen. A slow, strange sensation began to spread through Nora's chest. The suffocating, heavy numbness that had blanketed her for 28 days began to crack. Beneath it, something else was burning. Something hot. She stood up, slipping the key and the letter into the back pocket of her jeans. She walked over to the old, rusted furnace in the corner of the basement. She counted 3 bricks down, 2 across. She wedged a flathead screwdriver into the mortar line and pulled. The brick slid out effortlessly. Behind it, sitting in the dark cavity of the foundation, was a heavy steel lockbox. Nora didn't open it. Not yet. She pushed the brick back into place, leaving the box hidden exactly where Tom had built it into the bones of the house. She walked upstairs. Greg was standing by the front door, looking at his watch. "Truck's loaded, Nora," he said, tapping the glass of his watch face. "I need the keys. The demolition crew is coming tomorrow at 8 a.m. Nora looked at Greg. She looked at his smug, impatient face, and then she looked around the house. At the wainscoting they were going to smash. At the floors they were going to rip up. They thought they had won. They thought they had legally robbed a grieving widow and left her with nothing but a few boxes of old clothes. Nora reached into her purse, pulled out her copy of the front door key, and dropped it into Greg's outstretched palm. "Take good care of the place, Greg," Nora said, her voice completely steady for the first time in a month. "I hear foundations in this neighborhood can be incredibly tricky." Simon Caldwell was not a family lawyer. He was a corporate litigator who specialized in hostile takeovers, contract disputes, and bleeding his opponents dry through attrition. His office sat on the 32nd floor of a glass high-rise downtown, smelling faintly of expensive sandalwood and the sharp tang of ozone from the industrial copy machines. When Nora first walked into his office, wearing a faded cardigan and clutching Tom's heavy steel lockbox against her chest, Caldwell had looked at her with polite, practiced dismissal. Then she opened the box. She handed him the secondary deed, the trust documents, and the $75,000 in crisp, banded cashier's checks Tom had spent a decade secretly saving. Caldwell spent 20 minutes reading the paperwork in total silence. The only sound in the office was the rhythmic ticking of his desk clock. Finally, he set the documents down, took off his reading glasses, and let out a low, genuine whistle. "Your husband," Caldwell said, his voice carrying a note of profound professional respect, "was a very patient, very dangerous man." "Can they break it?" Nora asked. Her voice was small, still bruised from the eviction, but she hadn't cried in a week. "Break a bifurcated estate filed under a blind LLC that predates the transfer of the physical property to the Hayes Holding Company." Caldwell smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "Mrs. Hayes, they don't own the dirt. They own the wood and the drywall sitting on top of the dirt. And they have absolutely no legal right to access, alter, or occupy the ground below the floorboards. Let them renovate. In fact, let them spend every dime they have." So Nora waited. She moved into a cramped, noisy one-bedroom apartment near the train tracks. The radiator clanked at night, and the water pressure was practically non-existent. But she went to her job at the elementary school. She graded her students' spelling tests, and she watched the seasons change. She also watched the house. She didn't stalk the property, but she altered her commute just enough to drive past the old corner lot twice a week. The transformation was aggressive. Greg hadn't just knocked down the load-bearing wall. He had gutted Tom's work completely. In October, a massive green dumpster appeared in the driveway, quickly filling up with the cedar shingles Tom had stained by hand. In November, a crew of framers arrived to construct a sprawling, two-story addition off the back of the kitchen, pouring a massive new concrete slab right over the backyard where Tom used to grill. Nora watched the cement mixers churning, feeling a grim, cold satisfaction. Every cubic yard of concrete they poured onto that soil was another nail in their financial coffin. Greg and Evelyn were not just flipping the house, they were completely over-leveraging themselves. Caldwell ran a quiet background check on the Hayes Holding Company in late January. Evelyn had taken out a massive bridge loan, using the trust's other dwindling assets as collateral to fund the luxury renovations. They were installing marble countertops, a commercial-grade kitchen, and imported Italian tile in the bathrooms. They were building a monument to their own greed, entirely blind to the sinkhole opening beneath their feet. By March, the house was finished. It was unrecognizable, a sterile gray and white monolith of modern real estate trends, stripped of all its original warmth and history. A sleek wooden sign went up on the front lawn, "Coming soon," exclusively listed by Hayes Premium Realty. The asking price was $1.9 million. "They have an accepted offer," Caldwell told Nora over the phone 2 weeks later. He sounded like a man settling into a comfortable leather armchair to watch a prize fight. "A tech executive relocating from Seattle, all cash. They're rushing the closing to hit the end of the month." Nora sat at her tiny laminate kitchen table, tracing the rim of her coffee mug. Her chest felt tight, a mixture of adrenaline and a sudden, sharp ache for Tom. He should have been here for this. He should have been the one to pull the pin. "When do we tell them?" Nora asked. "We don't," Caldwell replied smoothly. "We let the title company do their job. Real estate transfers require a clean chain of title. The buyer's lawyers are currently running a deep-level plat map search to ensure there are no liens. When they hit the bedrock of the lot, they are going to find a steel wall with your name on it. We just wait for the phone to ring." The phone rang exactly 3 days later. Nora was in the middle of teaching a math lesson on fractions when her cell phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. By the time the recess bell rang, she had 14 missed calls from Greg, 6 from Evelyn, and a frantic, rambling voicemail that cut off halfway through. She didn't listen to the voicemail. She simply dialed Caldwell's office. "They found it," Caldwell said in lieu of a greeting. "Are they upset?" Nora asked, staring out the classroom window at the empty playground. "Upset is a word for when they get your coffee order wrong," Caldwell chuckled. "Your brother-in-law is currently experiencing a catastrophic cardiovascular event in the lobby of the escrow office. The buyer's title insurance flatly refused to underwrite the policy. They informed the buyer that the Hayes Holding Company doesn't actually own the land the house is built on. The buyer instantly pulled his all-cash offer and is threatening to sue your mother-in-law for misrepresentation and fraud." Nora closed her eyes. The silence in the classroom was heavy, but for the first time in 6 months, she didn't feel hollow. She felt entirely whole. "Caldwell," Nora said softly. "Set the meeting." The conference room at Caldwell's firm was designed for psychological warfare. The table was vast, polished mahogany. The chairs on one side were slightly lower than the other. When Evelyn and Greg walked in at exactly 2 o'clock on a rainy Tuesday, they looked like they had aged a decade. Evelyn was not wearing her usual immaculate designer dress. She wore a wrinkled trench coat, her hair slightly frizzed from the humidity, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Greg looked physically ill. His skin had a waxy grayish pallor, and he was sweating through the collar of his expensive dress shirt. Nora sat perfectly still on the higher side of the table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Caldwell sat beside her, radiating the calm, predatory energy of a shark circling a bleeding raft. "Nora, darling," Evelyn started, her voice trembling as she tried to force her mouth into that old, familiar mask of patronizing sympathy. She reached across the table, her hand shaking. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding, a clerical error with the county clerk. We need you to sign a quitclaim deed so we can clear this up." Nora didn't move her hands. She just looked at Evelyn's outstretched fingers until the older woman slowly, awkwardly pulled them back. "There's no clerical error, Mrs. Hayes," Caldwell said, his voice smooth and cold. He pushed a thick manila folder across the mahogany. It was a deliberate echo of the envelope Greg had dropped on Nora's kitchen island 6 months ago. "My client's husband purchased the subterranean and surface land rights to the property in 2018. The Hayes Holding Company owns the structural improvements, the wood, the glass, the Italian tile you just spent $400,000 on. But you built it on my client's dirt, and you did not ask her permission." "This is illegal," Greg hissed, slamming a fist onto the table, though there was no real force behind it. "It's extortion. Dad owned that lot. Your father bifurcated the deed to shield it from a previous bankruptcy, a fact Tom discovered and utilized," Caldwell corrected effortlessly. "It is ironclad. You currently own a $1.9 million structure that is illegally trespassing on my client's property. The new addition you poured over the backyard. That is an unauthorized concrete encroachment on private land. My client has every right to demand you demolish it immediately." Evelyn let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She slumped back in her chair, pressing a hand to shit of her chest. "Nora, please. The bridge loan. We leveraged the trust. If this sale doesn't close by Friday, the bank is going to call the note. We'll lose everything. The holding company will be bankrupt." "I know," Nora said. It was the first time she had spoken since they entered the room. Her voice was quiet, lacking any venom or malice, which somehow made it vastly more terrifying. Greg stared at her, his eyes wide and panicked. "You're doing this out of spite, because we asked you to move out." "You didn't ask me to move out, Greg," Nora said, leaning forward slightly. The memory of Tom's boots by the door flashed in her mind. "You evicted me on the day I buried my husband. You told me I couldn't keep the brass handles on the bathroom sink. You treated Tom's death like a real estate opportunity." Evelyn began to openly weep. It wasn't the delicate, manufactured crying she had displayed at the funeral. Her face was red, her mascara running in ugly, dark tracks down her cheeks. "What do you want, Nora? We'll split the sale with you, 50-50. Just sign the land over." "No," Nora said. Caldwell slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "Here is the offer. My client will not sell you the land. However, she is willing to purchase the physical structure from the Hayes Holding Company to resolve the trespass issue. She will pay you exactly $40,000 for the house. That will allow you to walk away without my client filing a demolition order." Greg looked at the paper, then at Caldwell, as if the lawyer had just suggested they set themselves on fire. "40,000? We put 400,000 in cash into the renovation. We owe the bank 800,000. If we take 40 grand, we are ruined." "Then take the house with you," Nora said simply. "You have 30 days to remove your property from my land. You can pack up your marble countertops, your 2-story addition, and your load-bearing walls, and you can move them somewhere else. Standard tenant notice." The exact words Evelyn had used on her hung in the cold air of the conference room. The silence that followed was total, absolute, and suffocating. There was no negotiation left. Greg looked down at the mahogany table, a tear finally spilling over his eyelashes and dropping onto the polished wood. Evelyn put her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as the reality of her utter financial ruin washed over her. They had brought a 30-day notice to a gunfight, and Tom had armed his wife with a bazooka. 10 minutes later, Greg picked up Caldwell's silver pen with a trembling, defeated hand and signed the structure over to Nora. When Nora walked out of the high-rise building and stepped onto the busy downtown sidewalk, the rain had stopped. The afternoon sun was breaking through the gray clouds, casting a warm golden light across the wet pavement. She reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing against the cold, heavy iron key Tom had left in the basement. She didn't know what she was going to do with the house yet. Maybe she would sell it and keep the millions. Maybe she would move back in and paint the sterile gray walls something warm and bright. But as she took a deep breath of the damp city air, she felt a familiar weight lift entirely from her chest. Tom was gone, but he had made sure she would never be pushed around again. The ground beneath her feet finally belonged to her. Sometimes the sweetest revenge doesn't require raising your voice, just a heavy iron key and a brilliant final play from beyond the grave. Nora didn't just survive her eviction, she absolutely shattered the vultures who tried to bury her. If this masterclass in quiet, devastating karma gave you goosebumps, smash that like button. Share this story with anyone who needs a reminder that greed always catches up, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories.